Hey guys, Matthew here. So, this is my face. First and foremost, for anybody who hasn't been actually tuning into the stream, uh, this is Passive Math, and from now on, all my videos will also have my webcam on because when I'm streaming, it's already on. So, I was keeping the webcam stuff for 5,000 subscriber special, but in the end, I ended up using it way before when I was actually streaming. But for the people from the YouTube, well, this is me. So this is going to be the 5,000 subscribers special, and also at the same time will be the Back to Basic episode number 8. Basically, what we're going to be doing in this video is speaking about the stat groups on filters, what they are, what they do, the advantage of using each of them, and the limitations of each of them as well. The limitations, sorry, of each of them as well. So it's going to be a fairly short video. Hopefully, I'll try to condense that as fast as possible, and hopefully you guys get a lot out of this because as 3.9 is approaching, there's a lot of things that will be changing, and I can tell you right away that being able to use these stat groups properly will be very, very, very overpowered when it comes to trading in the upcoming league, when it comes to flipping, when it comes to just live searching for your items for your own build, and all the shebang. So, let's get to it, shall we? The first stat group is AND. Well, AND is fairly simple. To be honest, this is what every stats filter starts with. It starts with an AND search. Well, it says stats filters. This is already an AND search. What that means is if I put life, and let's say I do 80, and then I do total elemental resistances, and then I do 80, so long as I don't limit anything, this will filter out basically any single item in the Path of Exile database online right now, on standard anyways, that has over 80 life and 80 resistances. Currently, you can see there's over 10,000 of these items online. Now, if I wanted to say restrict this a little bit and talk to the only boots in terms of filter making, and I would go in the item category and I would put 80 life and 80 total resistances. Maybe some of these boots would be uniques. Maybe some uniques actually have over 80 life and 80 total resistances, and maybe I don't want to see those. So under rarity, you can do any non-unique, which means it's going to show you any boots that are not unique. That could mean a normal, magic, or rare. Obviously, with this kind of filter, with this high stats, these should all be rare. As you can see, on standard online right now, there's over 1,824 items that have over 80 life and 80 resistances total in terms of pairs of boots. This one, if you were to look at closely, has 31 fire res and 30 cold res, which only amounts to about 61 total resistances. So since we're asking the filter to only show us 80, why is this popping up? Because the implicit adds another 20, which then reaches the limit of, the threshold to show, which is 81 total elemental resistances. So that's basically it. Basically how the AND search work. If you were to add in movement speed, for example, on these pairs of boots, you go ahead and put in a minimum of 30 movement speed. All of a sudden, the price skyrockets a little bit because you're looking for life, movement speed, and decent resistances. The more strict we go, the less items we're going to see, the more expensive they're going to be. Obviously, the better the items, the more expensive they're going to be. It's only natural, right? So if I went with a pair of boots with 110 resistances, 80 life, and 30 movement speed, we'd be in the multiple exalts when it comes to pairs of boots. Now, if I was to look at any, I'm sure that some of these pair of boots are actually posted for ridiculously low prices. For this one, for example, is posted at 30 chaos. Yes, it is corrupted without an enchant, which is pretty bad. But this one, for example, is 115 C. This one is 1 exalt and 1 day ago. So a pair of boots like this could easily be bought out and then, crafted or whatever, and then resold for a pretty hefty profit. We can do the same thing in Blight and see that some of these pairs of boots that are over 110% resistances, 30 movement speed, and 80 plus life are literally 1 exalt. While I'm sure they're worth about double that amount, maybe even triple that amount, depending on the base, the value of the actual base of the item, the sockets, etc. So, for example, if it would have had white sockets, if it's a pair of two-tone boots, stuff like that can add value for sure. So that's basically how the AND search work. It's pretty much the basic of all filter making in when it comes to Path of Exile, but it's also the one that is most restrictive and the one that I end up using the least pretty much always. It's very, very rare that in my filters I will actually use an and search because, as I said, it's just really, really restrictive, and it's gonna basically not show a lot of really, really good deals. Now, the not function is fairly simple. For example, in this one, I could go ahead and, oops, I guess I messed that up. I could go ahead and make a search for 100 life, and let's say, oops, elemental resistances. Let's say 100 life and 100 elemental resistances on a helmet. So here at this point, we'd be looking at helmets with, as I just stated, 100 life and 100 total elemental resistances. So what does the not feature do? Well, the not feature basically tells the API, which is the searching, the thing that searches for all these items and decides which ones do pop up and which one don't. You're basically telling the API, if this is available on this item, please do not show it to me. So if I was to go here and put some not and then add in some, I don't know, mana, for example, any helmet rolled with mana will no longer be shown. So we went from 202 matches to 191, which means something like 11 helmets actually had mana on them, and they're no longer showed. The thing is, the not feature is actually pretty good. It doesn't seem like it right now, but the thing is, you can restrict how strict you want your not filter to be. So here, I can say that, for example, I don't want to see mana, right? The thing is, if I would go ahead and remove the not for the time being, then I'll be able to see all my mana ones, right? So let's say that I actually kind of really want mana, but I only want good tier of mana. So for example, this is T2 mana, this is T5 with 50, this has 40, 40. Let's go on any. There should be a lot of these helmets here. Mana reservation. Alright, this one for example. Alright, let's see. So mana T1 would be 69, 69, 69. Let's see if we can find something that's a little bit lower. 65. Okay, so the thing is, MOM builds are available in the game. So what I could do is maybe I want really high life, and you know what? I kind of want high mana as well because I'm playing a MOM build, which is a mind over matter build, which means some part of the damage is going to be taken from your mana before your life pool. So let's say I would accept all the way down to, I don't know, T3 mana, which starts off as 60. So then then I could restrict my not filter to not show me mana, but only from 1 to 59, because anything over 60 I actually want to see. So how I would do that is I would say not when it comes to mana, but then the maximum range would be 59, because then at that point basically it's going to stop showing me any helmet with that has mana on it from 0 to 59, but 60 over will actually be shown. So again, if I go ahead and check up for mana on here, I should find, well, probably not going to find very many actually helmets with mana on them, but if I was to find one, yep, still none. If I was to find one, I'm pretty confident here that it would have the required mana that we're asking from it. So let's see if we find something on this. Yeah, see? Now we're actually seeing mana on helmets with over 110 life and 100 resistances. But the roll has to be over 60. In this case, it's 66. Therefore, it reaches over 59, which is what we're asking, 60 and over. Therefore, it works. So the not search can be very, very valuable for a lot of things when it comes to basically restricting at minimum values. So when making a filter and there's a roll that you don't really care for, something like mana, for example, but that can actually be pretty valuable depending on the actual roll of, that, restricting the filter to show you only up to, at a certain start in terms of values can be very valuable. For example, chaos resistance could be good for this, mana could be good for this, things like cast speed and whatnot can be good for this. Basically things that you don't really care for unless they're just really, really good on the actual tier and on the values themselves. So that's basically it for the function that is the not function. Now, this is one that a lot of people really get messy with and don't really understand, and that is the if function. So if function, when you start to think about it, should basically mean that if this, then this, right? It should be like, you know, what's this? What am I trying to say here? Basically the cause, and then what happens because of that cause, right? So if X, then Y. Unfortunately, that is not how the if function works at all. So for example, if I was to put in some life on my if function here, basically I'm kind of using a not function, but it's basically how I just explained how you can limit certain factors using the not function. It's kind of the same with the if function. The thing is, it serves a different purpose up to a certain point. You could use a not function to do a lot of it. You could use the if function because they kind of do the same thing. That being said, when you get pretty advanced in your filter making, you'll come to realize that the if function and the not function basically serve two different purposes. But if you're doing filters really casually, you'd probably end up thinking that the if and the not are basically the same thing. Because for example here, when I'm asking the filter, if I do this, if I do if, basically, and I do life, what I'm asking for the filter is that if there's life, then the value that I want to see is this. So if I was to put an and search and put some life on it, it would be the equivalent of doing a not search for life if it's under a certain value. I guess the only difference is that in the not search, the mod basically has to exist for it to work, right? Because when you're making filters, if I do an if search here, and then an and search, and then let's say a count search, and then like a wait search, all these lines between each function is an and search, which means if I'm asking for if life has to be over, let's say, 80, then I'm asking for life. So here I'm basically telling the filter, I need life on this filter, and I need the life, if it's available, to be over 80. Now you could just think, but why don't you just put 80 here? And that would make sense, right? Because I'm basically asking for the filter for a minimum of 80 life. The difference is that if I do this on the and search, it's going to tell the filter that I want and I need life on it. On the if variation, it's just that if the stat is available, it has to be in this specific value. Not sure if that makes sense. It makes sense to me, kind of. So basically, when it came to the not search, it was things that you do not want to see. When it comes to the if search, it's basically if the mod is available, it has to be available in that specific value. So for example, if life 80, and then we can remove this and this. So now we're basically telling the filter we want life, but we didn't put any value in the minimum or the maximum. But in the if search, we put a value of 80. So every single item on here will basically have, at the very least, 80 life. As you can see, 80 life. That's a minimum because in the if search, we asked for life. Now, if I was to basically remove the fact that I want some life on my filter and just use the if function with 80 life, and I go ahead and search, as you'll see, a bunch of items with no life whatsoever will appear. The reason for that is because we're basically saying if there's life, it has to be in this specific value. So for example here, 82, right? But a lot of them are just not going to have life because the filter doesn't tell them explicitly you need life. All it does is it says if there's life on there, I want it to be 80 minimum. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, you can ask in the comment and I'll try to, answer. I'll try to do my best to answer the questions. The count search is a pretty valuable search. This one basically allows you to count certain mods on your item. This is probably the second most useful tool when it comes to stat filters in the game. And the first one is going to be what I'll finish with, which is going to be weighted sum. So for example, in the count search, I could basically do life, then I could do cold res, then I could do fire res, then I could do lightning res, for example, and then I could count 3 of these bad boys, and then I could also do basically count count of, once again, 1. You can have multiple count searches, by the way. So long as the stats in themselves don't overlap, you're fine. But for example, I could put in lightning res here, and it's going to work, right? Because even if it's a count search and there's lightning res here, and this count search there's lightning res here, it's still going to work. Because it's just telling the API, hey, you need to count lightning res if it's part of this, but then you need to count lightning res if it's also part of this. So it's two different calculations, but they don't basically mess with each other. And I'll show you guys how this works in a sec. But for example, let's just start with this. Let's do life 80. Let's do, I don't know, 40. No, let's do 35. Well, no, we can do 40. We can afford to do 40. In this specific example, I'm telling my filter I want, let's do 4. So I want all 4 of these mods. Life, res, and I want them to be 40. If I go ahead and check this price of these helmets, for example, we'd end up seeing triple resistance helmets of over 40 for each resistances and 80 life. As you can see, these will get pretty expensive fairly quickly, but there's a way to get around that, to have items that are just as good but much cheaper. So for example here, if I wanted to basically buy a helmet and then craft something on it and sell it for a profit, I could do a count search of 3. So basically it's got to have life, cold res, fire res, and lightning res. The thing is, if I do that, I'll probably end up with a bunch of 6 stat helmets. So for example, this one just got life, mana, fire, cold, lightning. Or this one that has like 3 prefixes and then 3 suffixes. So basically, yes, I'm asking for 3 of these specific mods, but the thing is, I'm not somehow forcing the filter to enable me to be able to craft the 4th mod to make the helmet all that much worth all that much more. So how I can do that is using another count search with 1, and then use something like empty prefix modifier and then suffix modifier, and then basically telling the filter, okay, so you got to count 3 things in this mod pool of 4 mods. So it's going to have either life, double res, or triple res, no life. But it also needs to have either an empty prefix or an empty suffix, one or the other. So in this case, if I was to look at this, you'd see that basically on this helmet, for example, I have some life, I have some mana, I have 3 resistances of over 40, but then I also have an empty suffix modifier. Wait. That didn't work. It's empty suffix modifier. Okay, that wasn't working. Let's try this again. Alright, so this one has an empty prefix and an empty suffix. It's got over 80 life, which is what the threshold was, and then it's got 2 resistances of 40. So a helmet like this, that was posted for 1 Orb of Alchemy, you could easily buy this. Then you would craft another resistance, probably a double res. You could go, let's say, fire and cold to really push this helmet into being an extremely good helmet for fire and cold res. So you could put 20 of each of these, so 20 fire, 20 cold res of hybrid. Then you'd end up with a helmet with basically over 120, 130, almost 129 actually, resistance, and 90 life that you paid for 1 Orb of Alchemy that you could sell for a very good amount. Because at that point the helmet would have over, as I said, almost 130 resistance and then over 90 life. So that helmet would be worth a pretty nice, a pretty penny for sure. This helmet, for example, you could buy from 1 Orb of Alchemy. It's got triple res of over 40. You could craft some life on there, be it like 60, up to 70, I believe. And then you could resell that for way more than your 1 Orb of Alchemy that you paid for it. And this is basically going to hold true for all these helmets that you're about to see. This one is 99 life, double resistances of over 40, almost 45 actually. That's pretty crazy. Then you could add another 20 to each of these resistance, or maybe you could add like 38 instead to the one that's missing, which would be fire. Or you could do like cold and lightning, or you could do cold and fire, whatever you decide to do. Either way, you're buying it for a chaos with 99 life and 89 res, and then you're able to craft another 40 on top and then resell that for probably an Exalt. So very useful, the count search. The thing is, the count search is very restrictive. The count search is restrictive in a way that basically you're telling the filter to count for these many mods, and then you're inputting the value that you want for each of these mods. So for example, 80 life and 40 for each of the resistances, which amounts to, you know, 120 resistance or 80 life and 80 resistance minimum. The problem is some of these helmets are not being shown if they have, let's say, 39 fire res, even if they would have something like 45 cold res, which would basically be even better, but it's not being shown because of that 39. Well, weight search basically allows you to fix all of those issues. So if I was to use a weight search, let's say, and I'm going to weight all these mods, I'm going to weight all of them to 1, right? So for example here, if I whip out a calculator, all these mods, be it cold resistances for each of them, and then life, are all worth 1. Base value of 1. Now, if I wanted triple resistances of 40, or, you know, 40, 40, 40, I end up with resistances being worth 120, right? So fair to assume that if I was looking for that, I would be needing to look for a cold fire res of 40 each, which would amount to 40 plus 40 plus 40, 120. Then we'll have to adjust the life. Because the thing is, if I'm basically telling that cold res and fire res are worth 1 each, or lightning res for that matter, then having 2 of these together would be worth 80. To reach the minimum of, you know, threshold of 120, I'm missing only 40 stats. The thing is, I want to see 80 life. Since I want to see basically 80 life, I'm going to have to basically take this number that I'm missing and basically play around with what the life is worth versus what the values that I'm missing to come up with a number that would basically still make sense. So in this case, I wanted 80 life, right? I didn't want 40 life, which is the number I'm missing. If I was to weight this at basically a weight of 1, I want 80 life. So I could divide that by 80 and then come up with a 0.5. And then you'd have to do the reverse operation to basically know that it's worth two times as much, or basically divide your value by the 0.5. Either way, basically the value would be 0.5. So to figure out how, you know, we started with we're missing, you know, 40 value, but we want 80 to be the value that we want, therefore every point should be worth 0.5. Hopefully that makes sense. It's pretty simple math, really. When it comes to making filters, you're never really going to have to use very advanced math of any kind. It's always either subtraction, divisions, multiplications, or additions. So very, very simple math required to do this. You know, quick 40 divided by 2, or sorry, 40 divided by 80, 0.5, that's our value. In this case, let's see what appears when we go ahead and check the helmets. So in this example here, as you can see, we're going to have helmets that are going to be very, very, very different. Here we have our 80 life that we mentioned that we wanted. The thing is 86. So 86 means that basically our life is actually being worth 43. Now fire res is 425, cold res 43, and then 12 lightning res. So as you can see, this is a very scuffed helmet. It's a very scuffed helmet despite the fact that our filter is supposed to be super strict, right? Well, the reason why the filter isn't as strict as you'd want it to be is because while these values are really nice, basically they're no longer strict enough. So how you could do that is, and you end up basically looking at helmets that are actually worth more, that are still going to cost you somewhat less. So for example, in this one here, we have another helmet that costs 1 orb of alchemy. This one has almost 120 life instead of the 80 that we said was the minimum threshold. But it's also got 44 cold res and 35 lightning res, which means we're missing fire res, which we could craft, let's say 38 or whatever is the maximum, or we could craft a double res of 20, so we could put, let's say, 20 lightning res and 20 fire res, which in turn would give us 40 res plus 35 plus 44. As you can see now, instead of having the resistance threshold that we were looking at, which was 80, we end up with a helmet that's actually 100 and 19, and not only do we not have something as scuffed as 80 life, we have 117 life. Yet the price is the exact same thing. And you could go down the list and find a lot of helmets which are going to apply to that rule. So for example here, this one is pretty much different. Instead, it's the suffix is opened. This one though would be a little scuffed because it already rolled a life roll, but it's really low. How you could fix that is basically by inputting a minimum value to your life. So let's say here you're saying, all right, but the thing is I'm going to see a lot of helmets with like 40 life, which are going to make the item be worth enough to show, but still be absolute garbage. So you could set a minimum on the life, let's say 70, and now it's only ever going to show helmets with, you know, over 70 life. Which at that point you could be like, yeah, but isn't that basically the same as using, you know, the count search? Well, it's not, because your resistances and your life are basically being treated as separate entities. So instead of basically the API looking for specific threshold, it's looking for a combination of mods that will reach the same threshold, or even in this case a much higher threshold. Yet the item is going to cost the same thing. Because we're being way less restrictive with basically the minimum value threshold of certain stats. So instead of saying we want 40, 40, 40 res here, we could have something like 35, 35, and then like 50. I don't think 50 is possible, but maybe like essences or something. So that's basically how filters work and how you make them. That's pretty much all the stat groups. All you have to know is basically how I make my weighted sum filters is that you have to bring everything to the same value. So, for example, life can roll up to pretty much 70 for most items, 80 even for some items, and for chest pieces it's even more. So you have to consider that when, let's say, you wanted to weight life versus weighting something like attack speed on a ring. Attack speed rolls from like 5 to 7 instead of basically you know, let's say 80 for the minimum of life. So in this case, what you do, for example, if life, the minimum threshold was 70, right, and then attack speed, the minimum on a ring would be 5, you divide your 70 by 5 to come up with a ratio that would basically make the items or the mods worth the same. So in this case, attack speed rolls would be worth 14. Instead of something like 1, because life minimum threshold is 70 and that's worth 1. So if attack speed, the minimum threshold, we also want to be 70, but the minimum is only 5, then we have to come up with something to basically make the mods equal. Therefore the value is way, way, way higher for something like attack speed versus life on, let's say, on a ring. So that's basically how that would work. Now in this case, we said that life is only worth 0.5. So it's no longer 70 that we're basically looking for. We're looking for 35. So divided by 5, it would only be 7. So we can actually do this here and get this weight to 7. And then let's look for like a ring. And then it's either going to be a combination of all the mods that we chose. So in this case here, for example, you have the cold res, the lightning res is going to end up helping with the reaching the minimum threshold of 130, but we also have the 6% attack speed that we spoke about, which in this case would be worth, you know, 6 times 7, so 42, which is going to be worth a little bit over what the resistances are worth. Then it says there's an empty prefix modifier. As you can see, there's physical as a prefix and life as a prefix. So this life here is actually crafted life, which is not the same as life like here. If I wanted to consider the life as basically part of it, when it's crafted, I would have to look at crafted life, as you can see here, and then I could do the same thing, and that same ring is probably going to appear, but instead of being worth 132, I think it's worth like 136. It's actually not even the same ring. There's probably be, we can probably find it though. There you go. That's the same ring. So 6% attack speed. Instead of being worth 132, it's now worth 159. The reason for that is because now the crafted life is actually being accounted for. You don't want to use this though, because the idea is that you want to be the one crafting that, you know, life, for example. So what you could do in this case again is basically tell your filter to not use crafted life because you don't want to buy an item or see an item that already has crafted life if you're the person who is supposed to be crafting life to resell it for a profit. So in this case, as you saw earlier, our value here, if I go ahead and remove this, is something like 830. The moment I remove that I no longer want to see crafted life, it's 689, and then you'd have to remove that it's corrupted because otherwise, corrupted or mirrored, because otherwise you can't craft anything on it. So at that point we end up with 613. And from here on out, we should be seeing rings that make a lot of sense to purchase and to flip. So for example, this one has some pretty good life values, pretty good res, triple resistances. Basically, how much is this? 31 plus CBA to do mental math. 108 resistances with 78 life. On this one, we could craft something like, I don't know, mana to, like, less mana cost to non-channeling skills, or less mana to skills, or you could craft elemental damage with attack skills. You could craft whatever you want, really. On this one here, it's got really good suffixes. It's got the 7% attack speed, and then some pretty damn good resistances. So what we could do to make that ring worth way more is to add in some life on top of it. If we're going to look at online, I don't know if there's going to be too many. So let's see. So for example, if we were to look at this one here, which is worth 60C, how could we improve the value of this ring by a pretty good amount? Probably by crafting something like wet on it. So for example, this ring, if I was to look at it in another search, which is worth 60C, the reason it's worth 60C is because it has attack speed. So it's a ring. It's not unique. Oops, not unique. It's not corrupted. It's not mirrored. It's got attack speed on it, which is really good for a ring. It's got some life on it, so it's got 70 life on it. And then it's got some pretty nice res, cold res. So total elementals, not total. Here, I guess you could, let's just go ahead and use cold res. If you wanted to be super precise, you'd use a count search of 1 and use either, let's say, cold res of a T1, which is 46, right? As we just saw. Then you could also do fire res, 46, and lightning res, 46. So then you're telling the filter to count only 1, and you could even say maximum 1 because it also has a empty suffix. No, it doesn't have an empty suffix. It has some strength on there. Strength can add some value because it's actually worth the same as life, but for this example, let's not do it. As you can see, it's the cheapest one for 60C. Now, what if we were to add some elemental damage with attack skills? Elemental damage with attack skills. And in this case, we'd probably want to use the SOOO because we want to see if it's either crafted or if it's not crafted. And somebody kind of just added it on top. We don't need to add a minimum value because, as you can see, the crafted minimum value is like 15. So the ring went from like 60C to 5x. This is essentially the same exact ring. If you look at it, it's got 7% attack speed, 76 life, 1 T1 res, and crafted, you know, wed, and it's worth 5x instead of 60C. So as you can see, it's very easy to make a profit by buying an item, crafting one thing on it, and then reselling it for a much higher price. For example, in Legion, I was buying rings such as these. Instead of going for like attack speed and wed, though, I was looking for basically an empty prefix, life, physical damage to attacks, and then good suffixes of either attack speed, crit chance, crit multi, resistances, whatever it was. And then I was crafting mana cost of skills because it was a Cyclone League, right? And I was basically buying those rings for anywhere from 2 chaos to 10 chaos and reselling them for 1 exalt and higher. Some of them reaching up to even 8 exalts depending on the suffixes. So, needless to say, you can literally make some mirrors by buying items, crafting a couple, like crafting a missing stat on it and reselling it for a much higher price. The thing for that is that you need to have the proper filters. This is how you make the proper filters. So before I leave, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreons, Alex, and the other Alex, Mr. Coffee, Daniel, Fix, Francesco, Ichigo, DSM Beast, Johan, KFish, Kai, Kara, Manastryna, Pitmaster as Diablo and Stan. You guys are all fucking awesome. You guys are literally making this possible. So huge thank you to you guys. Thanks for all the 5,000 people who are now subscribed to the YouTube channel. Thanks for everybody as well who's dropping by the Twitch. If you guys want to drop a follow or even a sub, link to the Twitch is going to be in the description. Same for the link to our community Discord if you have any questions and whatnot. Lots of really, really helpful people in there. So, again, thank you guys all so much for the support. I appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.